There is a maternal lineage carried by living Anishinaabe people that has never once been found anywhere in the Old World. And for a time, that fact was twisted into a story that erased them. Nearly everyone indigenous to the Americas carries a maternal signature from one of 4 founding groups. Roughly 97% of Native American mitochondrial DNA belongs to haplogroups A, B, C, and D, lineages shared with East Asia, threads that reach back across the Pacific Rim. But there was always a 5th, rare, stubborn, out of place. In one early study, 70 Native Americans who did not fit those 4 common groups were tested for the mutations that define haplogroup X, and X was confirmed as a distinct Native American maternal lineage. Unlike the other 4, X was also found in the Old World, in Europe and Western Asia, and that single detail, an American lineage with cousins across the Atlantic, would set off decades of argument. Because if you were looking for a way to sever Native people from their own land, from their own deep history, Haplogroup X looked, at first glance, like the crack you could drive a wedge into. The question hanging over everything was simple and dangerous. Where did this lineage really come from? Part 1. The Wedge. Here is where the story turns uncomfortable. Because Haplogroup X had relatives in Europe, some proposed a transatlantic origin. The idea that this lineage arrived from the east, across the ocean, rather than from Asia, like everyone else. It was a hypothesis that, intentionally or not, chipped away at the settled understanding that the first peoples of the Americas came the way their descendants had always understood. But science is not a single guess. It is the long, patient work of checking. A critical reevaluation examined the American branch of Haplogroup X and reached a clear conclusion. This branch is its own independent subclade, called X2A. It is not derived from any European subclade. The transatlantic migration hypothesis was rejected. X2A, the researchers found, has never been documented in Eurasia at all. It most likely arose within the early Paleo-Indian population, roughly 13,000 years ago. The wedge, it turned out, had nothing to split. But if X2A didn't come from Europe, where and when did this lineage actually begin? The answer was buried far to the west, in one of the oldest skeletons on the continent. Part 2. The Man on the West Coast. The remains known as Kennewick Man carry the most basal X2A lineage yet found, the deepest, oldest branch of the tree. His genome shows no recent European ancestry, and it plants that deepest branch of X2A firmly on the west coast of North America. Think about what that means. The lineage that critics once tried to root across the Atlantic instead has its most ancient roots on the Pacific side of the continent, exactly where you would expect a lineage that entered from Asia. X2A wasn't a European visitor. It was one of the founding threads of the Americas, woven in from the very beginning, and it probably originated in the same Siberian population as the other 4 founding lineages. So all 5 threads, A, B, C, D, and X, trace back to a single source, a small band of people who, at some point, were somewhere together before spilling into a hemisphere. But where were they waiting? And why, for thousands of years, did they seem to vanish from the record before reappearing as an entire new world? Part 3. The Long Standstill. The answer is a place and a pause. During the Last Glacial Maximum, a small band of people persisted in Beringian. the now-drowned land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, isolated from outside gene flow for several thousand years. In that isolation, cut off, they accumulated novel genetic variants before expanding into the Americas. This is the Beringian standstill, a founding population held in place by ice, becoming distinct, becoming the ancestors of two continents. How long did they wait? The estimates vary, and honest science says so. One summary of a major 2015 study places the isolation as beginning no earlier than about 23,000 years ago, lasting no longer than roughly 8,000 years, and ending around 15,000 years ago. A Y chromosome study argues for a much shorter standstill, only about 3,000 to 5,000 years, with movement south of the ice sheets after roughly 19,500 years ago. The numbers disagree. The shape of the story does not. A people paused at the edge of the world, and here is the twist almost no one saw coming. That corridor did not only run one way. Part 4. The Road Back. For generations, the Bering Crossing was imagined as a one-way door, Asia to America, and never back. New ancient DNA has broken that assumption open. Remains of 3 people from the Kamchatka Peninsula, dated to about 500 years ago, carried North American ancestry. The corridor, it seems, saw movement back and forth across the Bering Sea region over thousands of years. And the signal runs deeper still. Native American-related ancestry contributed about 50% to some northeastern Siberian DNA from the Iron Age, with gene flow probably around 5,500 to 4,500 years ago, and genetic sharing with the present-day Koryak people of Kamchatka as recently as about 1,500 years ago. The scientists are careful here, and their caution matters. It is not fully possible to rule out an ancient shared Asian source, rather than literal backflow. Uncertainty is part of the truth, but the emerging picture reframes Beringia not as a closing door, but as a two-way corridor, ancestry flowing home into Siberia, carried by the descendants of that same standstill population, which raises the most human question of all. What happened to the people who kept the Fifth Lineage, X2A, alive on this side of the water, right up to today? Part 5. The Living Lineage and the Great Migration. They are still here. Across the Americas as a whole, X2A makes up only about 3% of maternal lineages. But among Algonquian-speaking peoples, it climbs to as much as 25%. Among the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, the specific subclades X2A1 and X2G are documented in living people. This is not an abstraction on a chart. It is a thread of descent, unbroken from the founding population, carried in mothers and daughters for 13,000 years. And the Anishinaabe carry more than DNA. They carry a migration story of their own. Their oral history recounts a great migration, 7 stop-in places and 7 fires. The prophecies delivered by 7 prophets after the people reached the East Coast. They followed signs, watching for Meigis shells to confirm the way, moving toward a turtle-shaped island. Turtle Island is the indigenous name for North America itself. They were told to travel to the land where food grows on the water, a prophecy fulfilled when they reached the Great Lakes and found manumin, wild rice, growing on the water's surface. It became a sacred survival food. Genetics traces one journey in mutations. The migration story traces another in memory. Both describe a people who moved, endured, and arrived. And both deserve to be heard, on their own terms. Part 6. Identity Outlasting Erasure. There is one more chapter, and it is the hardest. For more than 150 years, residential and boarding schools operated with the aim of erasing indigenous identity. The first boarding school in Minnesota opened on the White Earth Reservation, Ojibwe land. Carlisle in Pennsylvania became the model institution the others copied. An estimated 150,000 children attended these schools. In Canada, at least 6,000 died, and the last did not close until 1996. Assimilation began the moment a child arrived. Haircut, uniforms issued, names changed. The Ojibwe historian Brenda Child described the experience as something carried out in public, yet with an intensely private dimension, and one that produced outcomes its architects never intended, including new networks of pan-Indian solidarity. The policy was designed to sever a people from themselves. It did not succeed. The lineage that survived the ice of Beringian, that outlasted a false story meant to write it out of its own land, survived this too. X2A is still carried by living Anishinaabe people. The wild rice still grows on the water. The migration is still remembered. A haplogroup is only a marker. What it marks here is endurance, a family, a language, a people, still present after every attempt to make them disappear. The corridor ran two ways. So, in the end, did survival, memory and blood, arriving together at the same shore. If this history is part of your own story, and it weighs on you, in the US and Canada, support is available. The National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition offers resources for survivors and descendants, and Canada's Indian Residential School Survivors Crisis Line can be reached at 1-866-925-44419. You are not alone.